The silence was not peace. It was compressed dread, the kind that settles deep in the bones when the fighting stops abruptly at dusk and leaves behind nothing but the cold, chemical smell of spent ammunition and the taste of plaster dust. Sergeant Kael leaned his weight against the fractured masonry of what had once been a kitchen window, watching the moonlight cut ragged shapes through the surrounding skeletal trees. They had held the crossroads in Oakhaven for 3 straight days, trading artillery until the enemy simply vanished, pulling back into the shadows they cast. Now, hours later, the quiet was the real torture. Kael had learned to distrust silence far more than noise. Noise was honest. Noise told you where the danger was coming from. Silence meant they were planning, or worse, that they had forgotten you entirely. He watched Private Loden, 17 years old and looking 50, scrape dried mud off his boot with the bayonet tip, the tiny metallic sound amplifying tenfold in the vacuum of sound. Kael counted his breaths, slow and deliberate, a futile attempt to slow his racing heart. This abandoned house, draped in heavy winter air, felt like a tomb waiting for its residents to realize they were dead. His mind, starved of external stimuli, began to turn inward, replaying the last moment of human connection he could vividly remember. A rainy Tuesday morning, the smell of burnt toast, the sound of his daughter's laugh. That memory was sacred, a brittle lifeline he gripped tightly. He needed a sound, any sound, to anchor him back to the present danger. He needed the whistle of a mortar, the bark of a rifle, the predictable rhythm of threat. What he got, instead, was a sound that had no business existing here. Faint, tinny, and impossibly persistent, cutting through the blanket of cold stillness. The sharp, insistent ring, ring, ring of an old telephone. The sound wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying clarity, resonating from the collapsed inner hallway where the major damage from the initial shell had struck. It was a sound wholly domestic, utterly normal, and therefore profoundly alien to the war zone they inhabited. It didn't belong to mud, blood, or steel. It belonged to kitchen tables, weekend calls, and casual conversations. Kael froze, every muscle tightening. Loden dropped his bayonet with a soft thud that seemed deafening, his wide eyes meeting Kael's. They looked at each other, sharing the impossible realization that something alive, something connected to the world they had sacrificed, was attempting to make contact. Ring, ring, ring. It continued its maddening, monotonous rhythm, refusing to be ignored, refusing to be silenced by the devastation surrounding it. Kael finally pushed off the wall, his rifle held high, moving with a predatory caution that belied the mundane nature of the threat. If it was a trap, it was the most subtle, insidious trap the enemy had devised yet. He navigated the ankle-deep rubble, the broken glass crunching beneath his heavy boots, following the sound into the darkness. He found the source nestled under a shattered oak mantelpiece, a heavy, black rotary telephone, the kind his grandfather used to have impossibly intact. Its brass bell was vibrating furiously, desperately trying to convey its message. Loden whispered, his voice cracking, "Who the hell is calling, Sarge? It's 2 in the morning. Is it command?" Kael shook his head, his focus entirely on the vibrating object. Command didn't call civilian landlines in a ruined town miles behind the supposed front line. This call was from the civilian world, the world that held their memories and their reasons for being here. It was a beacon of normalcy shining into the abyss of war, and that light felt like a burning interrogation. The terror wasn't the sound of the bell itself. The true horror lay in the implication that someone, somewhere, didn't know this house was a hollow shell, didn't know the life that once resided here had been pulverized into dust and splinters. Someone was calling for a son, a father, a neighbor, oblivious to the fact that the receiver they sought was now resting in the pulverized remains of a home. Kael crouched down, the frantic ringing pounding against his eardrums, feeling the weight of all the potential messages. A warning, a casualty notification, or perhaps just a simple, innocuous hello. He reached out a gloved hand, hesitating just inches from the sleek, cold plastic. To answer it was to invite the real world back in, to tear down the protective wall of pure military focus he had spent months constructing. To leave it ringing, however, felt like a deliberate act of cruelty against the ghost on the other end of the line. Loden's breath hitched behind him. "Don't, Sarge. Don't touch it." But Kael couldn't stand the relentless judgment of the sound anymore. He snatched the handset up, the ringing instantly dying, replaced by a dense, chemical static. He pressed the receiver to his ear. Silence. Then, a sudden, sharp crackle, and Kael thought he heard something. A breath, a faint metallic sigh that wasn't quite human. He held his own breath, straining to hear over the white noise. Was that a voice? A woman's voice? Or was it just the line dying, finally succumbing to the severed wires and the miles of ruined copper? He pressed the phone tighter, desperately seeking meaning in the noise, but then the line went utterly dead, replaced by the profound, isolating hum of nothingness. The dread that had tightened his chest eased, replaced by a hollow confusion. He had held the connection to the world in his hand, and it had dissolved into mist. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? When the war demands you become a machine, which sound the relentless clamor of battle, or the sudden, absolute silence of a connection being lost, is truly the most destructive force on a soldier's soul. I want to know what you think. If you were Kael, would you have answered that phone, knowing the risk of what might be on the other end? Share your thoughts below. Kael slowly lowered the handset back onto the cradle, the dead weight of the silence pressing in again. The memory of the unanswered, half-heard whisper clung to him, far stickier and more corrosive than any shrapnel wound. The entire episode had lasted perhaps 90 seconds, but it had detonated a charge in his mind that months of training had failed to defuse. The call didn't just stop the ringing. It unlocked a door. Standing there in the ruined hallway, holding the artifact of normalcy, he was suddenly pulled back 20 years, not to the front, but to his cramped apartment kitchen. It was the specific sound of the phone ringing then, a cheerful, slightly muffled buzz coming from the living room. He remembered spilling his coffee, rushing across the linoleum floor, snatching up the cream-colored handset. It was Martha, his wife, calling from her sister's house, her voice tight with suppressed excitement. She hadn't said anything profound, just the simple, life-altering fact, "It's positive, Kael. We're going to have a baby." That sound, that ordinary, cheerful ring, had signified the creation of his world. He remembered how he had laughed. A sound so open and free it felt foreign even in his own mouth. He remembered thinking, in that instant, that nothing could ever hurt him. The phone he held now was the mirror image of that memory, symbolizing not creation, but irrevocable loss and the vast, unbridgeable distance between that laughing man and the cold, frightened sergeant standing in the rubble. He was no longer just fighting. He was perpetually grieving for a life that felt like it belonged to a fictional character. The phone, an instrument designed for immediate, intimate contact, had only reinforced his total isolation. He pressed his face into his forearm, tasting the salt of dust and sweat, letting the wave of homesickness wash over him, a pain far sharper than any bullet. The ringing never returned. The silence that settled back over Oakhaven was different now, tainted by the spectral energy of the interrupted call. Loden didn't ask any more questions, sensing the profound psychological scar the event had left. They understood now that the greatest terror was not the physical threat of the enemy outside, but the persistent memory of the life that had been ripped away, occasionally trying to claw its way back through the wreckage. The sound that terrified them wasn't gunfire, which was external and tactical. It was the ring of the telephone, which was internal, moral, and absolute, reminding them that they were still human beings attached to a civilian reality they could no longer protect or return to unscathed. As the first pale, miserable light of dawn crept through the window, Kael wiped the layer of dust off the heavy rotary phone, recognizing the absurdity of the gesture. He had to keep moving. He had to assume the enemy was still out there, hiding in the shadows, silent and patient. But the truth was, the greatest danger had already passed. It had rung its 3 terrifying rings and disappeared, leaving behind only the echo of what was lost. Sergeant Kael checked his rifle, adjusted his pack, and moved out, carrying the phantom message on the wind. The mission continues, but the memory of that sound will ring in his head long after the last shell has fallen. If this story, focusing on the quiet, haunting moments of conflict, touched your heart, please subscribe to Quiet Soldier Stories and join us again next time for another glimpse into the silent battles fought within the soldier's soul.